Hi, and welcome to this episode of The Purpose Turn. Today, I have the immense pleasure to welcome Dave Inglis, who is a friend, an author, a speaker, fill in the blank. He has a lot of titles. Person. Now, I reconnected with Dave last week, and what I found inspiring is how he resolved the dilemma of being more than your role. You might notice if you have spent a lifetime in a corporate career, when you go anywhere and somebody asks you, so what do? You identify with the role. And that might work, but it's also increasingly limiting. In a time where we all have to adjust, especially in mid career, we want to go in a new direction. That role, that title can be limiting. So, what I want us to explore here together today with Dave is how do you go beyond that understanding of yourself as the role and what becomes possible if you do? With that, welcome, Dave.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to hang out and have a great conversation wherever you want to take it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being flexible. I really appreciate it. Dave, you and I had this conversation about how you understand yourself and how, when you are in business for yourself, it's sometimes hard to say, this is who I am, this is what I do. And you told me that you recently resolved that. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you think of yourself and how you resolve that dilemma of how you introduce yourself and who you are as a professional and a human being that wants to support others?
For sure. I guess as we get into this and go, it's taken me probably like 15, almost 20 years professionally of being able to get to a spot where I can really have a world that I can feel comfortable operating in and kind of stewarding my life through. I mean, to your point of answering the question of who am I, what do I do? It's hard for me to answer. And it's also even more hard for like my spouse. Whenever we meet new people, somebody might ask, like, what does your husband do? And there's often a look that she can give me like, shit, like, how do I explain this? And I think that's the thing that I've always struggled with. That I've had so many interests and things that I've explored in my life that when somebody asks, who am I, what do I do? There's this instinct to want to go back in history and kind of start at the beginning. And for me, in the work that I do now, I've always struggled to kind of make sense in my mind. Like, what is it that I am doing? Like, who am I becoming? And how does my work and my personal life come together in a really meaningful way? So, to answer your question, like, where have I landed rather recently? It came to me not too long ago. Actually, it was right around my birthday, like a day or two. I think it was maybe 27th of February, 28th. Not that it really matters, but we were with a small group of friends out in a vineyard here just outside of Valencia, where we live in Spain. And as we were sitting there, we did a fun tour of the property and we were coming up, we were having a nice glass of wine together, looking over the mountains. And it just kind of dawned on me that what I really am is a winemaker. I'm somebody who has been focused diligently on continuously evolving the terroir of my life. And through that, and really being a student of my life and continuously learning, whether that's as a parent or as somebody who supports a lot of leaders in the coaching work that I do, or even just my own personal interests outside of work, every single year that I've lived, based on the terroir that I have been navigating, what the climate of my life looks like, I'm typically finding myself 2 or 3 years later in a place where, based on what I've gone through, I'm now able to coach and to be able to serve in a particular way based on the lived experience that I have. And for me, this has been quite confusing because, admittedly, like, my journey started in sport medicine, doing kinesiology at school. I started a concussion business. And then from that, I got into teaching entrepreneurship after exiting that business. And then I started doing corporate innovation. And then as I thought about going back into starting another business or investing in some, I had a young family getting started. I became a stepdad real young to a 6 and a 4-year-old. And instead of going that way, I decided to get into family counseling and family coaching. And all along, while it's been really driven by my interest, admittedly, I've struggled to make sense of it. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? But now, as I kind of look back and all of a sudden this metaphor of stewing in a vineyard came to me, it felt so good because really what I've built over my life is a cellar filled with fantastic, very unique wine. And my gift, the thing that I'm really good at, is two things: is one, continuing to travel the world, to taste new things, to learn new things, and to bring that back home. But in the work that I do, where I work with a lot of leadership teams and families and individuals, what I know how to do really well is to understand the situation. If you use the metaphor of the vineyard, I know what we're having for dinner, what's on the table. And my gift is being able to go into the cellar and to pull out the perfect, the most appropriate bottle of wine for the moment. And in some cases, there's that classical stuff that everybody might like with a nice slab of red meat or a good piece of chicken, your Cab Sauvignon, if you will, the difficult conversation session that I could lead, or a really good coaching conversation around being able to bring curiosity into what you're doing. And I also have some reserve selection down there, some stuff that's very unique, maybe not for everybody. And all of a sudden, arriving at this gave me a way of looking at my work that was so much truer to who I am, instead of trying to force myself into defining the coaching practice that I run, or I only work with families, or this is exactly what I do in my role. It's always felt, a high temptation to want to do that, to be able to explain very easily to other people that I am a leadership coach. That's not just what I am. That's not how I've ever seen myself. And so this metaphor of being a winemaker helped me make sense of history. And more importantly, it got me really excited about how I am moving through my days day to day, continuing to evolve the terroir of my life and make sure that I'm continuing to be a really good student, modeling student behavior, and through that, being able to put some really good bottles in the cellar to be able to share with others.
Amazing. I love how that came together for you. And I can see how this metaphorical stance allows you to give structure and allows you to be you while simultaneously holding up and taking part in all these roles. And it's like you have understood yourself in a metaphorical way that aligns with all these different ways of performing in the world, with performing all these. Now, what I'm really curious about is how did that affect the way you talk to people? Because you said it before, it's really tough to say, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and I'm this. And are you going around now saying, I'm a winemaker? Or how did that impact that side of your expression?
Well, I think to your point of these different roles that we have and identities that we assume, I think we have lots of different identities, right? I mean, even if you think about who we are in the different moments, we're constantly becoming somebody new. And for me, being able to just have this world or this metaphor of being a winemaker helped me build an identity that was big enough for everything to fit underneath of, where I didn't feel like I was shifting back and forth. And what it's really done for me in conversations and go, instead of coming in and feeling like I need to explain who I am, I focus a lot more on like, well, who are you? And what are
Mm,
you going through? And based on what you're going through, what part of me can I bring to this conversation that's going to be most meaningful and rich for us to be able to have a really great, wonderful, intimate time together? And so it's allowed me, like I said, I think just to have a bigger identity that I could fit all these pieces into, instead of trying to force the conversation to fit into what I think I am, being able to really focus externally a lot more and understand the environment and how I can actually just show up in a way that's most relevant and contextual to what's happening. So that's
mm,
how it's really changed for me. No, I don't go around explaining that I'm a winemaker to people. And I mean, the irony of this is I love wine, so it serves that personal interest too. But it has left it open enough. Just like when you go to a vineyard, it's like you don't start by just talking about, the exact type of wine you make. There's lots of different wines. And yes, you might have a best classic award winning one that people know you for. But anybody who really wants to understand the vineyard knows there's more depth, and they're interested in the process and what's happening
mm,
behind the scenes. And for me, that's the type of conversation I want to be in general with people. I'm not really interested in that like kind of front label type of conversation. I often say to people, maybe this is an interesting elaboration just to kind of share with you. A lot of vineyards have restaurants. I love eating great food. There's two parts of a restaurant. There's a dining room and there's a kitchen. The dining rooms, it's all nice and tidy. It's perfect, especially if you have to go to some nice fine dining restaurants. The expectation is that what comes out of the kitchen is spot on without any errors. Perfection is what you're looking for. And for me, I see a lot of people in our world hanging out, especially professionally, in the dining room. And are there certain moments for like that? Like when I'm going to present and lead experiences with a bunch of leaders, do I have to be on? For sure. But the one thing that I realized by hanging out in the dining room too much it actually creates a lot of disconnection where we try to bring in an identity of somebody who's perfect or a teacher and an expert and has everything figured out. It leaves people who are in the room with us comparing themselves and ultimately asking themselves, do I match? Do I live up to? Where do I fit in comparison to this? But for me, I think what's way more interesting is hanging out in the fucking kitchen. Like in the kitchen is really cool because while we all have nice, tidy dining rooms, everybody's kitchen is a mess. Everybody's kitchen is filled with experimentation. Everybody's kitchen is filled with opportunities to taste new things and to be able to ask ourselves, what can this blend with? What is the opportunity that's here? And for me, like
Mm.
that's really exciting. That's where change happens. That's where intimacy exists. So I find myself hanging out in the kitchen a lot more these days. And truthfully, I think that's what we're all really starving for is like real conversations. And whether it's listening to them or participating in them, I'm a kitchen party guy and I love being around people who welcome me to them into their kitchen as a part of just how we spend time together. That's where it's really meaningful.
I love that. And just to stay in this analogy for a moment, kitchen is also where growth happens, where novelty happens, right? If you hanging out in the dining room and you have your role and you have your place in that dining room on that specific table, and you want to do something new, but you're not willing to embrace the messiness of the kitchen, which means like to step back, to engage with others, unfiltered, open, explorative, you will be stuck. You will be sitting at this table forever.
I think even as like a, if you think about being around leaders that we've been with too, right? Whether that's people that we work directly for, or people that we're learning from, or even future employers if we're looking for new opportunities. Think about the dining experience, the difference between being at a table, things coming out, and the chef just staying behind the wall compared to that lovely moment when the chef comes out filled with grease. And it's like, yeah, we just made this. Here's what into it. And I got to run because I'm going to do something else. The thing that I've realized, even from like being able to live a little bit more effortlessly, is when you're not having to take off like the cooking attire and put on the front of the house attire all the time, it's so much more effortless to be able to move between those rooms. So it's to me, even that metaphor speaks so much to my own experience being in a restaurant, but also being with people. That's where it's real interesting.
And what really shines through for me is how much you enjoy engaging in a purposeful way. The way you phrased it earlier was that you wanted to really be with somebody and really meeting that situation, really meeting that person in the moment, not pre identifying as X, Y, and Z, but seeing what's most meaningful in that interaction with another person. And for me, that shows like this
Hmm.
back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, right? It's like ask yourself, okay, what room am I in? Who's sitting across the table from me? And what would make that dinner that we're having together the most exciting, the most meaningful, the most interesting, the most delicious? Did you always have that attitude towards engaging in the world and meeting people and engaging with them?
I certainly have, but I'll be honest, I found it hard to do all the time. Why I've struggled to have a way of being able to make sense of who I am in the world and the way I'm going about my life and my vocation and the things that I'm doing personally is because I just haven't seen a lot of examples of this other than like, here's the type of business that you run, here's a group coaching program, here's how you structure it. And it just feeling like it's like rinse and repeat of the same thing. And we work in a corporate environment a lot of times, there's this expectation to come in as the expert, as somebody who's polished. And so while I've always felt this in my heart of how I just want to be able to live, I'd be lying to say to you that I've always been great at it. And it's still something that I'm genuinely practicing. There's a real temptation when we go into rooms, whether it's for a job interview or to, address a team or to meet with a client, to come in where like we feel like we're kind of auditioning, you know, kind of auditioning for the moment. I want this to be helpful. I want this to be valuable. Instead of going into the room under the influence of knowing that we've just accepted fully who we are, which is inclusive of the things that we're really good at and the things that we're starting to figure out and continuing to figure out and have no idea around. So
Mm.
it's been a real temptation. And I'll be honest, moving to Spain over the last 2 years, one of the unexpected things that's really come from this shift in my family's life is I've kind of removed myself from my usual environment where a lot of those implicit cues or just things that would reinforce that type of expectation to audition have been very different. I've been able to come to a new country, to a new community, and well, of course, I stay connected virtually. I have an opportunity to kind of begin again and really deliberately practice this more consistently in
Mhm.
an environment that has less temptation. And so now I find myself as I come back, I now have been able to embody this a lot more. And my ability to live in it as a bit more of my default is just more sincere and more accessible, to be quite frank with you. So it's been really helpful being away from that. And that's where I think when we lose our identities, whether it's somebody like me who like and chooses to, leave one to go and start a new one. Or for others, a lot of times we don't choose to do that. It happens to us and we lose a job or we lose a partner or something happens in our life where we're now asked to rebound from it. There's a real great opportunity to begin again in that and to be able to write the next iteration of it and to find a way to be able to bring a more full expression of who we are into the next chapter of our life. So, a hard thing to see in the moment when you have loss, but especially when we hear stories and connect with others and hang out in the kitchen long enough, I think we all have examples of where that's really been true. And that's the
Mhm.
opportunity that can be right in front of us if we choose to see it.
Right. So seeing disconnect not as a loss, but rather than an opportunity to connect with self and then live from that place instead of living with the loss and wanting to regain that old role. You basically advocate, hey, take a step back, use that break as you did, like moving to Spain, to reconnect what's true for you, who you are, what's important to you, and then start living from there. And another aspect that I take from your story is that I think what's unique about where you are in life is that you have a wine cellar full of bottles. And so does every professional out there who has spent 10 or 20 years in a career, right? You have all these bottles, all these vintages you could bring to the table, but you don't because you think that based on where you sit and based on who sits around you, the only bottle that you bring to the table day in and day out is bottle X, right? Is your Chardonnay or whatever, right? While you have so much more.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too, like seasons change for a reason. But I see a lot of people who are continuing to live an identity that is far beyond its expiry date,
Mm,
trying to make wine from a season that's gone. And for me, a big part of what I think helps myself, and I know a lot of other leaders too, is like the power and potency of solitude. When we go through loss and we have that disconnect, I think the inclination is to want to look for some certainty. And that often it comes from being around other people or trying to go and get in the job right away or find a place to land. But for me, the insights and understanding of what season of life am I actually in right now? What one am I no longer in and that is leaving? Solitude has played a really important role in me being able to actually experience my life raw enough to be able to really put my hands in the soil and like figure out like what is available to be made right now based on the season that I'm in and being able to let go of those chapters that are no longer there. I mean, this is true professionally and I think it's very true parenting wise. I mean, I have an 18-year-old daughter who's going to university this year. The role that I play in her life right now, if it was the same role that I played when she was 13 and 14, I can tell you the risk of a bigger rupture and a bigger disruption is going to be far greater in my life. And so when we live in identities that are no longer really appropriate for the season, we try and bring bottles of wine that are just out of season and not necessarily attuned to the moment. I think we run the risk of actually missing great opportunities to really bring what's needed. And so solitude plays a really big role, I think, in understanding the seasonal nature of life and how that changes. And that's true of all aspects of life, I believe.
Dave, in this world of constant interruption, constant go, go, go busyness, how do you embrace solitude practically? Because I think for a lot of us, especially when we have kids, and you had kids for quite a while, how do you find time to embrace that? And how do you cultivate your thought in these times of solitude?
It's a good question. I think these devices obviously are one of the greatest killers of it. I think we always have opportunities to be in solitude where we are depriving ourselves from any external input, whether that's being at a coffee shop without headphones, without a podcast, and actually just truly being with ourselves in a very micro and a smaller way. I mean, for me right now, to answer your question very practically, this is one of the unexpected things I've really enjoyed about moving to Europe, where most of my life still exists in North America. I have this 6 hour kind of lag where my phone does not buzz until 2 p.m. So I've structured my life in such a way where I have some brighter red lines where solitude is a little bit easier to access in that space. But admittedly, as we kind of settle in and have our life here, we now have friends and people around that while I might not be connecting virtually to life back home, life has started to get busier here otherwise. And so I even recognize in my life that how I find space for solitude is asking to change right now. So I
Mm,
think what that looks like very practically for me and what's worked really well is when we kind of sit down, my wife and I, and look at the calendar and do some planning. This is one of the first things that I'm often structuring my entire personal life around is typically every 4 or 5 months going away for 2 to 4 days just by myself. And I've been able to find some really lovely places where I can be alone, I can be in nature, I can bring my favorite bottle of wine and make some good food and really just use it as an opportunity to have enough space where I can really get into a place of being able to connect with myself and what's going on and just kind of tune into my life a little bit. For me, the truth of where I am has never really arrived when I'm busy. And so over the years, knowing how critical that space has been, it now has become something that I really ask my wife and my family for support to go and do. And now
mm,
it's interesting. I think a lot of us are going through life in partnership. My wife does not like that same type of space. She gets her solitude differently. And there was a season in my life where I wouldn't go away because she wouldn't go away, or I would wait until she had a plan before I would ask if I could go and do mine. But I've now
mm,
just come to appreciate this as such an important part of my own practice. I'm being able to do that. So that's how I do it. I like really carve out big chunks and
mm,
just being able to have the feeling that comes from that. I find that again, the solitude really is a returning to an embodied state is what for me I've been learning over the last few years. And so when I have a chance to marinate in solitude for a bit longer, I remember what that feels like. And when I have that feeling in my body, then I can access a little bit easier when I'm waiting at a bus stop for my son and the bus is 20 minutes late. Or all of a sudden I am in a queue and it's now been closed and I have to come back another time and I can come home and I just have an unexpected walk that's there. That feeling, really it's a feeling I think solitude brings and that's where longer prolonged periods in it have been very helpful to remember what that feels like so that way I
mhm.
can experience it more day to day around there too.
It reminds me of a recent conversation that I had with Tennille Miller, who wrote a book on flourishing. And early in the book, she distinguished between living outside in versus living inside out. And it sounds like these moments of solitude really allow you to reconnect with self and then live a little bit more in attunement with self from the inside out. Really like thinking about, okay, the bus runs 20 minutes late. Great opportunity to like be there with myself instead of feeling like I have to distract myself or do something else that somebody else wants from me right now and keeping our like to-do list top of mind. Is that how you see it? Or how do you feel in these moments that allow you to have 20 minutes to yourself?
Yeah, I think you've described it really brilliantly there, living inside out versus outside in. I think that's a perfect way of putting it. To me, the way that going back to the kind of like dining room, kitchen, outside in to me is like auditioning, auditioning, auditioning. Inside out is like accepting and then going out into the world with who I am. And so I think you've described that really quite brilliantly to be quite fair. I really like that way of thinking about it. And to me, when I'm inside out, like the bigger identity that I find myself really able to live into in this little world called the vineyard, if you will, is I'm a student. That's who I am. I'm a student who is trying to just model really good student behavior. And to me, that's inside out. Like when I go away on strategic solitude, it is like to be a student. It is to study myself. It is to do the hard work of that, to be able to do it. So when I come back out into the world, I can model good student behavior. And for me, where I've slipped is when I started to go out and try and be a teacher or try and be an expert in something. And I see this in a lot of people who are in the coaching space or in the consulting space of trying to be the pro facto expert in something. And inevitably, what I often see as a byproduct when we live outside in is that we don't typically get in a lot. We continue to live outside, outside, outside. It's never
Mm.
really outside in. A lot of it stays outside. And so what happens is slippage. All of a sudden, the audio doesn't match the video. The thing we show outside is not actually how we're living inside. And that's where we start to have some real problems, in my opinion. And so that idea and the identity that I think is transferable in any situation we go through, it helps us become more adaptable, is truly committing to having an identity of somebody who is a student modeling good student behavior. If I take that into my relationship, wow, am I ever going to continue to evolve and to learn and to grow from the things I go through, good or bad? From a parenting perspective, same thing. From my vocation, same thing. And that's where I think it allows us to be a bit more ambidextrous, if you will. Like I can still have my core responsibility, but I can also be learning and trying something new, knowing that all the stuff I'm learning is continually informing how I can go out in the world and help, or all the things I'm learning and tasting inevitably become bottles of wine that I can throw in the cellar and start to share with other people.
I love that, Dave. So, just looking at the time here, we're coming up to our 30 minutes, wondering, like, what's your advice to somebody that lived from the outside in, or tried that is stuck at a table and wonders, like, how on earth am I going to go back to the kitchen and start to embrace that? Like, based on your experience, based on your, like, the bottles you have collected, what's the bottle that you would open?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like how do you bring somebody into the kitchen where you haven't necessarily been in a while? Like, what comes to mind as you ask this, I'm not sure why I have this come into mind, but perhaps it's appropriate. Back in 2017 is when I was probably at the peak of living outside. Like, and I'm saying that specifically because like I didn't really go inside that much at all. And one of the things I remember doing that was so helpful, and truly this was catalyzed by a separation in a relationship that left me kind of searching and looking around and starting to ask some of these questions. What I decided to do was to pick something that I was going to commit to that forced me to be a student unequivocally. And for me, that was choosing to do Ironman and endurance racing. I had never done it. I actually didn't know how to swim when I started. And so swimming was this outlet for me when I think about that experience where, I mean, of course, I could float in a pool with a beer, right? And have some fun and go to the beach, no doubt. But when it came to like swimming and doing lengths and the idea of like needing to do 4 kilometers of this at some point in time over the next year, it put me into an environment where I was unable to bring all the identities that I was used to having and carrying, that outside in, that front that I always had. It was totally irrelevant at 5 a.m. in a pool.
Hmm.
And in fact, it didn't help at all. Like I couldn't. As soon as I put on my swim trunks and got in there, that environment that I chose to put myself into forced me to be a beginner and forced me to be a student and only a student. And so if you ask like what would I do or what's the bottle of wine that I would like bring out, I would ask, what is a new beginning that you're actually excited about and somewhat scared about because you actually don't know how it's going to go. If we think about trying to learn and be a student like that, I have to go into that teaching environment, allowing the teaching from a swim instructor to change me. I can't be defended. I have to be undefended. I have to go in there being willing for this practice to help me instead of holding up the idea that I know what I'm doing. And
Hmm.
so for me, where this kind of comes down to is, and it doesn't need to always be work related, that this is where we feel like we live outside, outside, outside. Because I think fundamentally what we're talking about here is nervous system development. Can I actually create an experience in my body where it feels safe to be a student, where it feels safe to go into the kitchen? And so finding something that allows yourself to remove and be removed from the community and temptation and people of where you have inhabited that kind of outside in living, where you can be anonymous, where you can be a total beginner and
Hmm.
you can give yourself an opportunity to really experience that. My goodness, that does so much for your heart and your relationship with yourself. And I see that as being very transferable personally. And I think it is an experience worth investing in that, like I said, it starts to develop the feeling in the body and the nervous system capacity to be a beginner again, to go to the inside, and more importantly, to have other people see you being in the inside and not having all of your shit figured out.
I love that, Dave. Beautifully put. Like, what I want to add to this is it seems like a very good way for us to experience ourselves again and realize that we can actually trust ourselves without having to put all our bags into a basket we don't own, which is the role, the title, or whatever is out there that makes us feel more protected, more safe, more, I don't know, recognized. And with that, we like develop this fear of, oh, what if this is going down? What if this is going away? And what you showed us is a way to say, hey, wait a second. I am somebody. I have something. I can lean into something. I can grow. I can develop. And I can show myself that I get this or got this, no matter what life is throwing at me. And thank you so much for ending on that. And I hope it inspires some of our listeners to say, okay, what's intriguing? What's interesting? And to just try it out and be messy in the kitchen. With that, Dave, thank you so much for spending the 30 minutes with us here today. And I really appreciate you and the wisdom that you brought to today's conversation.
A true gift. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to opening up a bottle of wine with you over this summer at some point in time, be it metaphorically or quite literally. So thank you so much for having me.
Same. Thank you.